Good morning. We're in Beis, volume 2, page 1169 at the bottom. That's where we're up. So we're up to discussing now the two dimensions of Ayin. So let me just sum up the whole section here. So we have whole Seder Shtalshlus, as he explained when he began this topic of the Rosh Hashanah Maimer on page 1141. That's where this whole section began. So all Seder Shtalshlus is divided into Yesh, Ayin, and Yesh. In its root, it means everything. Even the way a seed, for example, a seed is a Yesh, it deteriorates in the ground as Ayin, and then it becomes a tree or a sapling or whatever it grows into is a Yesh. But in the root of it all, the big picture is the Yesh Amiti, the source, God. The Yesh HaNivra, the other end, is the product, the creation. And the Ayin Be'emtza is the channel or the field of energy that God uses to both use as a process for creation and also the tools and essentially like a ladder and stepping stones for us to be able to retrace the steps and connect the two levels of Yesh. So it's think of it like a field of energy in between, which in turn divides into two general levels, Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. And the last, we're talking now 60, 40, 20, 25 pages have all been around this. Different aspects, first of all, where it is located, what is the meaning of Ayin, what's the difference in Ayin of Yesh Amiti, Ayin of Yesh HaNivra. But briefly, without going into all the details, because he discussed many details here, the Ayin essentially is a level of Oir, or in other words, Bittul. The question is, what level of Bittul is it? If it's Ayin of Yesh Amiti, so then it's a Bittul that's completely sublimated and nullified in the presence of its source, and its purpose is to express whatever Atzmos the Yesh Amiti wants to express. The Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra's role is a divine energy as well. It's an Ayin, Oir, but it's an Ayin that's focused on and engages with the creation. The Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra is the Oir Eliki that we would call, in different words, I'll speak about in a moment what level exactly it is, that manifests and relates to existence. So it's also a divine energy, but it's a divine energy that focuses on the function of creation, of the product. So what it does is introduces a bittul, the bittul that's commensurate with the Yesh, bittul HaYesh. And that relates to the perspective of Das Tachten, perspective from below, that first we begin with a Yesh existence, and we travel upward and recognize there's some force, some divine force that gives us, that creates us and maintains and perpetuates and sustains us. And the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti is a bittul b'mitzias, because all it is completely bittul to the source. Now, as far as the placement goes, so in the beginning of the discussion, after the Rebbe Rashab went for a lengthy discussion, and we also went through Tzadik Daled. So the last 25 pages, there's been a lot more than 25 pages. We've covered more than 100 pages. Because the Tzadik Daled, Hemshech Tzadik Daled, the Frierdiker Rebbe, quoted and elaborated on all of this. So briefly, what was learned was, why is the Yesh Amiti called Yesh Amiti? Because it's the only true absolute reality. Yesh HaNivra is a created reality. And the Ayin is not a true reality, because all it is a reflection of its source. It doesn't have anything of its own. Then he went and discussed exactly where are these levels of Ayin. And he explained that he explained three different ways you can explain that. One is that the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra are both before the Tzimtzum. The Ayin of the Yesh Amiti is more the Etzem HaOir, which is only dedicated, all it is Metzias Nimtza of Atzmus manifesting in some type of what we would call existential manner. The ayin of the yesh hanivra is in lifnei tzimtzum itself, the levels that begin to associate and envision an existence. That was one. This, which itself had many components to it, two at least. The second, he spoke about the before the tzimtzum is more ayin yesh amiti, or more generally sevav kalalman, transcendence. Even the transcendent energy after the tzimtzum is still transcendent. It doesn't manifest in kalim. And mamala kalalman is the energy, the divine energy that manifests in kalim. That's the ayin of yesh hanivra. And the third way of explaining it, and he said that's the kavana kan. The third way is really the focus here, and that he says that line exactly right here. Just show you. Where is it? In the bottom of page 1149, look at 3 lines from the bottom. So he says, Omnam kana kavana, the close bechinas ayim mitzvah ben hayesh, hu bechinas pnimi. That here in this hemshech Ayin Beis, even though those two explanations exist, but here the primary focus is that both levels of ayin are an pnimi. And that divides into two. So an pnimi itself, imamala kalalman, which is already a divine energy that relates. There's also one that is what he calls first, l'cheda, he said, one interpretation he gave that is the kav. That's negei v'davuk. That's the ayin of the yesh amiti. The part of the kav that is connected to its source. Yeah. And the ayin of Masava is the lower part of the kav that relates to existence. But then he went to say that in truth, it's also, you could say, is the et b'mala kalalman and the of the pnimi and the spashtus of the pnimi. Just like in the etzem and extension of the before the tzimtzum, there's 2 levels. In mamala also there's 2 levels, the chitzenius and primius. And that's the kavanah of the 2 levels of ayin. Okay. Then the Rebbe Rashab continued and said that the meaning of ayin of yesh amiti has a different meaning than the ayin of yesh hanivra. They both use the word ayin, but the ayin of the yesh amiti means total nullification. And the ayin of the yesh hanivra, you can't say is totally nullified in the presence of its source, because it creates something. So why is it called ayin? It's called ayin for 2 reasons. Because it's not of the same substance as the yesh that it creates, and musig. It's not comprehensible to us. It's mysterious. It's a mysterious force from the perspective of the yesh, because it's not yesh mi yesh, it's yesh ma ayin. Okay. Then he went on to explain that there are actually 4 interpretations in the ayin of the yesh amiti in its level of bittul. Briefly, one is heder tfisas makim, that the in the presence of its source is like shraga betira, like a flame, a candle in the light of the sun. Number 2, the bittul of ein zulase or ein zulascha, where the is not just that it doesn't have function and is nullified in the presence of the source, but it itself, in its very existence, recognizes that it has no substance of its own. It's entirely dependent on the source, and without the source, it wouldn't exist. The candle doesn't feel that in the light of the sun. That's a deeper level of bittul. The 3rd level is efes biltecha, which means that there's not even existence of All it is atzmus. So why is it called Because it's not atzmus mamish. It's atzmus as it expresses itself in this state, what we call ayin. That's the 3rd. And the 4th, the highest level, is the Rebbe, in the words of the Rebbe in B'yem Nashmini Atzeres Tavshin Tezvav, or the words of Ayin Beis, is the bitl how atzmus sees the oir. So in other words, the oir itself assumes the properties, assumes the perspective, I should say, of das elyon, how atzmus sees everything, and from that perspective, obviously everything is completely nullified. So the first 3 levels are all still from the perspective of oir, 3 level. Here, oir is assuming the perspective of its source. Yeah. So all this was explained all the way back to page 1158. This is all the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. Then the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra, on the other hand, as we said, is not about total nullification. It's about providing the Yesh an ability to have Bitl HaYesh, to be able to rise up and transcend to a higher place. So it's a different role. The Ayin of the Yesh Nivra recognizes the Yesh Nivra. That's why it's Das Tachten, that something exists, but that existence is now going to become sublimated and nullified due to godliness. But it's a far, far lower level. That was explained on pages 1158. And then in the last mimer that we learned, he went on to say, so where exactly does this Das Elyon and Das Tachten reside? So first he said, Atzilus. He said, is the level of Ayin of Yesh Amiti, like Das Elyon. That's in the last mimer. 1 second. One minute. Then he says, in Atzilus itself, we have both levels. They have both levels. You have both the level of Levushim, which is more Ayin of Yesh Nivra, and Spheris, which is more illuminating the Ayin of Yesh Amiti. You recognize both dimensions. In other words, depending on which level in Atzilus. Then in Atzilus itself, he said, Chochmah has both perspectives, Pnimis HaChetzenis HaChochmah, and then Chochmah Ilah and Chochmah Tata, which is Chochmah and Malchus and Atzilus. In this mimer that we're learning, he's moving back to actually what he said much earlier, what we spoke about, what Kavona Kan, that's why I mentioned that, about the Kav. But first he began by explaining that Atzilus itself, when you look at the Pasuk Eliyah, which he's been explaining in this whole process, it appears, he says, that all of Atzilus is L'Tzedek HaElamus, is all the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra. And Keser would be the Ayin of Yesh Amiti. And then in Keser itself, he spoke the difference between the outer and inner dimension of Keser being both levels of Ayin. And then even in the inner dimension of Keser Atik, there's also two levels of Ayin. Where we are now, on page 1169, he said, Va'inyan hu Yeshlemer, because in general, the two levels of Ayin is in Pnimi, in the Kav, Pnimius HaKav, and Chutzenius HaKav. So clearly, I didn't mention this till now, but now when you look at it, this looks to me like an exact continuation from what he discussed at the bottom of page 1149 and 1150, where he said, Kavona Kan of Ayin is the Pnimi. So he's explaining the Kav, which really continues the ideas that he spoke about there. So let's sum up what we learned, and then we'll continue on. So in the second half of the page, after the paragraph...
What would be the translation of Kan Hapnimi? Like here, the presence here, or what?
Kan means in this Hemshech Ayin Beis, in this discourse.
I see.
We're focusing on this approach. Okay, so now he says like this. Briefly, the Kav is also another paradox. On one hand, it's light and connected to its source. On the other hand, it's made up of nukudis, which means points. The spheres are beginning to take shape in the Kav. So based on that, he says, that's the outer dimension of the Kav that relates already to some form of structure. Since it relates to form of structure because it comes after the Tzimtzum, therefore, it is more the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra. And then he goes on to speak about what we discussed, the Tzimtzumim, the partitions, the curtains and the partitions of the Mesachim and the Prasois. So bottom line, this is all due to the fact that the Tzimtzum concealed the Eir HaBligvul before the Tzimtzum and allows for this flow that is now tailored towards creating and shaping existence called the Kav. I explained this more at length in the previous classes. I don't need to go through the details. So he says, "V'kol zeu l'fi sheklol is gilei hakav u'rak ha'ara der ha'ara." Because this is all due to the fact that the kav, the general revelation of the kav, is only a reflection of the reflection of the Oyer before the tzimtzum, because the Oyer before the tzimtzum is ha'ara. And the kav is ha'ara of ha'ara. Ba'orcha nira Oyer. Okay. Then we came to a parentheses, which we're actually in the middle of. So let's elaborate on this parentheses. So we learned in the parentheses is that there's also another side to the kav. Not the structure that it's going to create, and the structure within it, the nekudis in the kav. Remember, a line is made up of points. But the kav is also negei of a davuk. It touches and is attached to its source. And it's not a ha'ara nivdalis. So it's a ha'ara of a ha'ara, but it's not separate. It's not like detached from it. It came after a pause, but like he says, chazir v'hayir. The oyer before the tzimtzum returned through the kav. So now, yes, it's being channeled like a kav. It's not oyer habligvul that is untethered and unlimited and unconfined. It is structured, but it is a reflection of the light before the tzimtzum. But on the other hand, because it came through a tzimtzum, he says it's not dveikus mamish. And I explained what that meant. It's not dveikus mamish as if there's no tzimtzum at all. That would be completely attached. Here it's attached, but it's not completely because the tzimtzum did change some of its consciousness. And he explained the differences between Gilia Etzem and Gilia Mina Etzem. That earlier in the Shavuos Maimer, last in volume 1, he spoke about that there's two Giluyim that come from the Etzem. One comes from the Etzem, from the source, but one is like the source. In other words, if someone asked you, just to give an example, to express yourself. So most of us would not express all of ourselves. We would look at who we're speaking to. We look at our target audience, or the individual you're communicating with, and you'd communicate commensurate and relation to this person. That's why you speak very differently to your spouse than you do to a stranger, to your family than others. Even among friends, each of us processes how we're going to communicate with a particular individual. Where's there a situation where that's a gili mina etzem? It's coming from you, it's not false. We're not talking about false representation or hypocrisy or echad b'peh, echad b'lev. You say one thing and you mean another, and your heart. We're talking about true expression, but it's a limited expression. Where you express yourself entirely, where there's no filters, that would require you completely letting down your guard, no defenses, completely comfortable being vulnerable. It could be at a simcha. Sometimes Chassidus explains when you're marrying off a child, there's a certain hispastus you don't even think about. You're just completely glowing, and all your faculties are just shining forth. And it could be other times when we're either with someone extremely comfortable with. It says when people went into Yechidus to the Rebbe, it was Yechidus from the word. Yechida meets Yechida. The Rebbe, the Chassid's Yechida meets the Rebbe's Yechida. So there, what a Chassid did, he bared his soul. There was no filters at all. He spoke about everything as if you would speak to someone, as if you'd speak to yourself. No fears, no fears of judgment. Complete bearing yourself. I'm just giving an example. So Lamaila is the same thing. Gili mina etzem means that from the etzem of Elokus comes a gili. This is the gili of the kav, which is God wants it for a particular purpose. So therefore it has a particular function. Gili ha'etzem is, and using the words he says here, Gili mina etzem u'masha atzmus megala er she'ena lefi eifena atzmus. It's not lefi eifena. It's not completely based on his presence. It's with a particular function and focus. Kim lahoyer es there, the oyer is to radiate the worlds. The gilia etzem u'mash atzmus megala lefi eifena atzmus. That's he's revealing himself commensurate to who he is. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean that oyer is atzmus. Atzmus is far beyond oyer, and oyer is infinitely distant from atzmus, just like yesh, just like other levels. But etzem oyer is that when God wants to reveal himself, he's revealing himself without filters. That would be etzem oyer, gilia etzem, I should say. So it's without filters, it's an expression of himself, which is vital because we want a relationship not just with God, how he relates to us. That would be the gilia mina etzem, the kav, in this context, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, or the Ayin of the Yesh HaNetzal. We want a relationship with God as he is in his full glory, without filters. Like when he says in Tanya, in Perek Lamed Vav, from the Pasuk, Mashiach comes, it says, V'lo yikonef eid meirecha, v'ho ye'necha reis es meirecha. Lo yikonef eid meirecha. Your teacher will no longer have a garment that will block and conceal and filter him, but you'll see the reis es meirecha, your eyes will see directly. Whereas today, we see it through a garment, through a veil. As such, you see something, but it's not the full expression of it. Which, of course, an example of a teacher and a student. A teacher has to give the student according to the student's abilities. He can't just start speaking and rambling whatever is coming to his mind, because it'll be completely overwhelming. But we want to experience not just the way our teacher is in relation to us, Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, we want to relate to the teacher as he is in relation to himself. And that's the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, or what he calls here, the Gilia Etzem. So, this level of is not to radiate the worlds, not to illuminate and create the worlds. Its inyan is only to reveal Atzmus, reveal Elikus, pure one thing, awareness of the divine, revelation of the divine. We gave the example of the chief of staff and the other functionaries, the example of the artist as he's within himself, as the artist as he begins to relate to another. I mean, there's so many ways to explain this, but this I think suffices. Machshava dibur can be an example a little. Machshava is how you think to yourself. Dibur is how you're communicating to another. It's not a perfect example because machshava is also already a form of expression, not purely who you are. But relatively speaking, you can use that example if it helps. So I'll continue now. I'll stop if anybody has any questions. But I'm going to continue. We're still in the middle of this parentheses about the Kav. So 2 lines from the bottom of 1169 is where I'm ready to continue. But anybody want to ask anything?
Yes. Das Tachton. When we say Das Tachton, we I think we refer to the fact how the Nivra has consciousness about the Alakus or Lamaila from our perspective. When you say the Ayin shall Yesha Nivra, is that the Ayin that's emanating from God, but it's Litzorich Olamos, meaning that it's from his perspective, but it's a different level of Ayin within him? Or is it still, when you say Ayin shall Nivra, is it from our perspective? Where's this Ayin coming from? From godliness or from us, so to speak?
Everything comes from godliness. God creates existence. It's like asking, where's Mamala Kalam come from? From us or from God? The Kav. Basically, because Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu Liyas Leis Baruch Dira B'Tachtenim, so you need 2 things here. You need Tachtenim. Tachtenim are defined by structure. Bereshis Bara Lekimus HaShemayim V'Aretz is coming from God. But it's a God that is now manifesting to become a Beira, a creator, and he's manifesting in 10 spheres through which he creates, and Asara Ma'amaris Nivra Elam, and in 10 statements. Vayemer Elikim Yehir Eir, Vayemer Elikim Yehir Rakia, Vayemer Elikim Teitzi, Vayemer Elikim Teitzi Eretz Desha. This is all God speaking, but he's creating something that's not a reflection of himself. He wants to create Tachtenim. On the other hand, you need Dira Lo Yizbarach. You wanted this Tachtenim to be a Dira to God. So therefore, you have a level of Ayin and Oyer that's more reflective of God himself. So essentially, like the difference between, we learned earlier, the difference between weekdays and Shabbos. Everything is created by God. He created the weekdays, he created Shabbos. But as weekdays is God manifesting himself, and Milad Yeta is the expression. In the words, it's like the king discussing mundane matters, the creation of existence. Yemei Chayil, the weekdays. And Shabbos is Lav Urcha de Malka Lishtoi B'Milad Yeta. The king is going back now. You want to talk about what concerns me? That's Shabbos. Let's talk about the Kavana, Ruchnius, the higher worlds, etc., etc. So basically, this is all of Chassidus. Talks about the 2 tracks, the 2 emanations, one called Sovev Kalam and one called Mamala Kalam. As I explained before, the two levels of Ayin, which reflect the two levels of Das Elyon and Das Tachten, are both within the divine, and there's different ways it's explained. It's two levels before the Tzimtzum, it's before the Tzimtzum and after the Tzimtzum, it's in Mamala Kalam and Pnimi, it's in Atzilus and higher than Atzilus, in Atzilus itself, the Chachma, and so on. Now we're talking how these two perspectives of the divine are in the Pnimius Hakav and the Chetzenius Hakav. So it's all divine emanations. Once you have a creation, now the creation begins Avodas Hashem, so we have something to hold on to. The Yesh now starts the journey upward. We first latch on to Ayin of Yesh HaNivra. That's the Ayin we can relate to. When you say a bracha, Birchas Hanenim, a bracha on food, Birchas Hamazon, you're taking a Yesh, and instead of indulging in yourself, you're recognizing there's a Koyach Aleki, Lo Alechem Levade Yichya Adam, Ki Im HaMeitzei Pi Hashem Yichya Adam. You're recognizing the Meitzei Pi Hashem, Meitzei Lechem Min Haaretz. That is Ayin of Yesh HaNivra, as it associates to Lechem Min Haaretz. Beire Mina Mizenis, Beire Priya Gofen, Shahakal Niyeh B'Dvarei. These are all God's words. Dvarei, Beire, Omer. It's all God speaking, but now the Yesh is relating to the Ayin of Yesh HaNivra on a low level, and then you keep climbing and climbing as you grow in your Aveda, with the goal, obviously, to reach where Das Elyon and Das Tachten meet, or Ayin of Yesh HaMiti, Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra meets the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, which in turn helps it understand Atzmus, which is beyond it. So basically, that's the way it works here.
So the ladder.
I thought this would be pretty. 1 second. I thought this would be pretty obvious. I'm happy to explain it, but I'm not sure.
No,
This is the central theme of everything.
What I'm trying to say is that maybe I didn't explain my question there as well, is that ladder that we're climbing up, is that ladder like thrown down to us by God and the lower rungs are sort of like
the whole Seder Shtalshus. God
so
created,
there's no. Go ahead.
God created existence. He created Seder Shtalshus. He created the ladder.
Right. So it's not originating from our own consciousness.
It's originating when you climb it. When you do Aveda, you're originating when you actually climb it. The ladder has no purpose if you don't climb on it.
Right, but the ladder comes from God. It doesn't come from us. We're not creating a ladder. We're just starting to climb it. With God's ladder.
Where is life? 1 second. Why don't you ask the same question? What about life itself? Who created life? Who created you and me?
No, but
didn't God create us?
But when you say you were Yesh Me'ayin, there's some type of disconnect there, apparent disconnect, where there is some type of separation.
Because we don't climb the ladder. Because the Yesh does not feel godliness. We are living in a world of blindness. You look around yourself and look at everybody. We are focused on ourselves. So it's a tremendous chiddush that a Yesh that doesn't feel anything, that can be completely absorbed with its own self-interest and even be destructive in the process, begins to even look up and look at the ladder and start climbing it. That's the major chiddush. That's the biggest chiddush of all. The rest is God created all that. He put that in place, but he gave us tools. Now comes the hardest part, is to have the first step is to stop focusing on yourself and look upward and begin to climb.
Okay.
That shift changes everything. That's the whole kavanah, is when a person shifts from egocentric to God-centric. That's the biggest chiddush in everything. No bigger chiddush than that.
Right. So getting back to your level of Dira B'Tachtonim, when you said Gila Etzem and Gila Mina Etzem, Gila Etzem is with no filters, as you said, just being yourself, expressing. And we always say that really happens in a person's Dira, in their home. That's where they express their etzem, is in a home. That's why maybe with Dira B'Tachtonim we're trying to create a world where God can reveal his etzem, not Mina etzem, but his etzem itself. Would that be correct?
Yeah, but we're now 5,781 years working on trying to prepare the Yesh to be able to be receptive to that.
But don't we say that even a husband and wife, isn't there a level of mystery? Even the highest yichud of a husband and wife, don't we say there's a level of a wife that's unaccessible?
Since when do you think Gilead Etzem is not going to be a mystery? Why is mystery? You think you're going to own it? No, you'll never own it. You'll just experience it. We're not looking to own God.
Or understand it. When you say own, you mean understand it or so, right?
No, you want it on your terms? It's not going to be on your terms. It's going to be on God's terms, but we'll be able to be part of it without being annihilated.
And we'll be able to see it, experience it.
Well, read Tanya Perek Lamed Vav. He talks about that very directly. How is that possible?
Okay. So that mystery that a husband and wife has with
Since when-
each other, that will always be there, but we'll experience that mystery of God.
What's wrong with mystery? One second. Why did you make
What?
actually far closer to the truth than no mystery? If it's no mystery, mystique is actually much closer to the truth of godliness, that there's a mystique, there's an awe, than attained.
Shkoyach. Thank
Being
you.
at peace. Okay, good. Let's continue now. 2 lines from the bottom of page 1169. She says like this. The text, go to ayinbeis.com. It's all posted there, PDFs of these pages. V'yesh leimer, we can say, the whole thing began before the parenthesis. Dveikus mamash or not. He says, generally, the dveikus of Oir, of the lower level, of Gili Mina Etzem. So Gili Hirakia, Vayemer Elikim. It's God's words. This is attached to God's mouth, so to speak, and God's intentions. He says, well, Aldera Bechinis is Chatzrus Hamavur B'Mokem Acher V'Nizbar Le'il Dibra Maskla Anoichi Anoichi. Okay, I need to explain what this means. Some of you may recall, back on page 1159, 10 pages ago, he spoke about the 2 levels of dveikus. If you look there, you'll see closer to the bottom of the page. He spoke about the ayin of the yesh hanivra is different than the ayin of the yesh hamiti. So the ayin of the yesh hanivra.
Call from cell, so then why?
He talked there about the ayin of the yesh hanivra, that it's in a form of not dveikus. He said ena dovuk. He said ha'ara nivdelas, malchus. But then he asked the question, if creation is some type of leap that is not a reflection of Atzmus, it's meaning, I'm just looking at the words here, one second. Bechinis nifred. He gave the difference between thought and speech. That thought does not separate from the person. Speech separates from you because it extends outside of you. So therefore, creation comes in the form of dibur. That's what he said. Asar ma'amaris. What he called that, koyach nivdal, like a koyach nivdal. He said, "V'agam the kol koyach aliki gam afil madregi yesod techten is also dveikus." And though every force from God, every godly power, is also connected, because if not, it wouldn't be a godly power. And especially creation must come from the koyach habayre, like he says in Ageres HaKedesh Chaf, hulavade. So he answered that dveikus in creation is different than the dveikus of etzem ha'or. Why? Because the dveikus of creation is primarily to renew the energy. Because you can't create a yesh if it's not constantly renewable. Since the yesh doesn't have any power of its own, so he says it's his chachus, that every moment it needs to be renewed. It's like the heartbeat. The blood needs to be connected to the heart. Why? Because the heart has to pump the blood all the time. So the purpose there of dveikus is his chachus. Avla dveikus urak b'derech his chachus lebechin is dveikus mamish. Dveikus mamish means that etzem gili ha'etzem, not gili mina etzem. That all it is an expression of atzmus. Creation his role is not to be an expression of atzmus. It's actually an expression of something that's not like atzmus. A yesh that doesn't feel its source. But it needs dveikus because without that, there's no renewable energy and it's not perpetuating. So the dveikus is in order for the divine energy to keep flowing. Whereas the dveikus of etzem ha'er is saying here now, back on where we are now, bottom of 1169. So the dveikus of Gilia Mina Etzem is like his chachus. It's like a renewing. It's renewing the energy that God has to constantly renew, like he says, Shari Yuchad V'Amuna, La'elam Hashem Dvarchav Nitzur B'Shamayim. So that's a dveikus. He's constantly renewing the energy. He's saying all the time, you hear the oir, you hear the kia, and if 1 second he didn't say it, all of existence would cease to be. That's Gili Mina Etzem. So there's a dveikus to keep renewing it. And Gili, that's B'chinis Chasham Vur Mokmach V'Nis Balel. Rak Shezehu B'Madregas, next page, 1170. Gavoya. Oh, let me stop before that. One second. And Gilia Etzem would be a different thing altogether. It's not about renewing the energy in order to keep the creation in place, to keep sustaining creation, but rather it's a Gilia Etzem to reflect and give us a taste of godliness. Just to give it a little more explanation before I read on, Chassidus explains, why we have Nisim and Teva, Nes and Teva. Why do we have these two different ways, God governs existence, a Teva and Nes? What? It's a sefer of one of the Chakrim, Rabbi, what was his name? Arami. That was his name. Okay. Yitzchak Arami. That these two different approaches, these two different tracks, give us two different experiences of the divine. Nature shows us God's perpetuating, the consistency, the relentless consistency of existence demonstrates what he calls Keyach HaTmidus. That's constant, it's constant. Nes teaches us Chidush, something that changes and is about the suspension of the laws of nature, show us the power of God. God does not do miracles for no reason. Every miracle has a purpose. Generally, miracles, like Chassidus explains, Nis comes from Adam Nisi, like the word a flag. Atop of the mountain, you have a flag. It lifts existence, because when you have a Nes, you get uplifted. Kriyas Yamsuf, other Nisim, you suddenly see a reflection of a divine that you don't see in the daily grind of life. So a Nes Begiluyim has that element of being more like a Etzem. It's showing us that God exists. Very often we'd like to say, I wish God made a miracle. Just show us your presence. Teva, on the other hand, is much deeper. That's why a Nes Melubish B'Teva, like Purim, or general nature, the godliness is concealed in the process of creation, so it's constantly being renewed. Like the Baal Shem Tov says, that a miracle is simply a bunch of miracles happening in such a fast sequence. You can't tell. No, the difference between nature and miracle is frequency. If the sun were to rise once in our lifetime, we'd see it as a miracle. Nature is just simply things becoming routine. In our eyes, we could lose sight. That's why a miracle happens from time to time, to remind us that there's something greater. Just an example, it's not Mamish Gilia Etzem and Gilia Mina Etzem. That's an expression that God wants to show himself. And Gilia Mina Etzem is what God wants. He wants creation, he wants Teva. He doesn't want a Nisim per se. They're only there from time to time to lift us up and remind us or wake us up or something like that. Okay.
Rabbi, some of us are having.
So one second. I'm in the middle of a. Hold on. It comes after the hefsek of the tzimtzum, so therefore it's not completely attached. It has some type of leap, and he compares it to Gilia Etzem, Gilia Mina Etzem, and now he explained it's like his chachus, where the renewal is there. So it's connected to the source and it's being renewed. Now he's going to explain what that means. Qualify that. What?
Rabbi Jacobson, the connection is really poor right now. It's just you're breaking off a lot. For me, for what Mr. Rabbi Weiner, I think it is. I don't know anybody else.
Does anybody have difficulty? The sound?
Yes, it is breaking up a lot.
Yeah.
It has to be with the device on the recipient because I have two of them. One is good and one is bad.
Yeah. Breaks over here too.
Breaks or not? Is it good or not good? Here,
It's
all of
inter-
you guys.
It's
It's on
intermittent.
the side of the
Not
Mekabel is not good. The Mekabel is not good. I have two Mekabel. One is good and one is not good. So the Mashpia is good. The Mekabel is not good.
Well, both of my Makabli, my cell phone as well as my desktop, are not behaving properly. So
Mine also.
it's being stuck in your sentences are just in the middle. I can't hear it. The completion.
When did this begin? When did this begin?
It's been bad the whole session, but in the past 5 minutes, it's
5
gotten
minutes.
terrible. That's why I interrupted you. You thought I interrupted you. And on my screen, you were paused.
Right, exactly.
So right now, how's it right now when you hear me?
Good.
Somehow it got a little better.
I don't really know.
My phone is not on the Wi-Fi. So without Wi-Fi, it's working. The computer is on Wi-Fi, it's not working.
So
So
what
it's
can I
the
do?
way.
I don't know what I should do exactly. Does anyone have any advice?
No,
Zog
nothing.
weiter Chassidus.
Yeah, that's results.
Zog
I
Okay, I'll continue and hopefully it'll break through all the symptoms.
I think we should sell our shares in Zoom tomorrow morning.
That assumes we have any shares.
Listen, Twitter may shut us down altogether.
Indeed.
I'll just continue. I don't really know what to tell you what to do. I don't have a solution. What should I do? Restart my computer?
That's the only solution.
I think so.
Or just,
Want me to do that?
I don't think you have to restart it. I think maybe if you could just end and come back in,
No,
if you could exit and come back in, that might help.
Let's
I'll
restart.
Well, that's restarting the session. It's not restarting the computer.
No, I'm not going to restart the session. I'm just going to leave and come back in.
Right.
Let me see if it works. You guys still see me?
We see you. We empty chair at least now.
I have to assign this to someone before I leave. Who should I assign it to? Zvi?
We see your chair. Your chair is empty.
No, but I have to assign the program.
You assigning host to somebody?
Just assigned it to Tzvi.
Whatever that means.
It just means you're holding the meeting now, whether you like it or not. You're the host.
You know, I turned off my Wi-Fi and it seems better.
I think it was him because I'm hearing everybody else here on this call just fine.
Yeah, it is the Wi-Fi. It's definitely the Wi-Fi.
I didn't touch anything and everything's better.
You use your phone without Wi-Fi, you'll get it better.
Well, how come I hear everybody on this call perfect except Rabbi Jacobson?
Well,
Rabbi Jacobson, your microphone is muted.
Okay, is it better now?
Try it.
good now.
Try it.
You know,
Yes, yes, we hear you.
Try, go.
What's that? But Tzvi, I need you to reassign this to me. I assigned it to you. I'm not the host. You know how to do that?
no, I have no idea.
Oh, boy.
When you talk, we
Go
can.
to participants. Go to participants.
Yeah. Yeah,
Now click on Simon Jacobson.
I did.
And it should give you an option to assign him as host.
Says mute order, rename, play video. No, it doesn't say that. Or it doesn't. Anyway. It doesn't say that. Oh, wait. I got it. I got it. Done.
Okay.
Done. You're now the host.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is this better, by the way?
So far.
So far, so.
Okay, everybody mute, if you don't mind. Mute, there's too much noise. So now he says like this. So the kavi is established as gili mina etzem. It's not dveikus mamish. It's only his chachus. Rak, but he qualifies. That don't make it too small. It's a pretty high level. Rak shezeu mebadregas. Next page, 11. Govoya. Even though it's a gili mina etzem and it's not dveikus mamish like gili ha etzem, it's still in a very high level. Shagam dveikus kazu. He b'chinas gili erein sef mamish. That also this dveikus is a erein sef mamish. Don't minimize it. In other words, it's not quite like gili etzem where God is unfiltered revelation. It is filtered through the kav, but still in a high level. So even such a dveikus, which isn't dveikus mamish, is also a state of mamish erein sef mamish. However, it's erein sef as is being filtered and directed through the kav and the nekudis, meaning the kav as it relates to existence. And now he's going to bring a Kabbalistic example for this, which I'll explain. We've learned this, but maybe if you don't, it may need explanation. And this is going to be the end of the parentheses. So all this is about explaining kamoi, for example, or like, Sha'ayinika derech side is the Abba, Yenik Mamazl, Mabchinis Primis Akeser, Harizelamayla Harba, Mabchinis Islapshus, Samal Bishim, Lizreas, the Arich, Ukamesha Kosma Kamachiv, is Boyer Gam Ken Le'il. I'll translate. So there's an expression in Kabbalah that says that Chochma, Abba, Yenik, it nurses from Mazola is Primis Akeser. Mazel usually from Nezlim and Alavon, Mazel is usually the source. For all practical purposes, think of it like the source of Chochma. So it says that the Abba, Chochma nurses, receives energy, but it's coming through a very narrow flow, like narrow wires, like hair strands, from Primis Keser. That's one thing that says about Chochma. So Primis HaKeser obviously is a very high level of the superconscious, Atik. So how does Chochma relate to Atik? It can't be a direct flow because they're too distant from each other. But it flows like through narrow strands. Think of it like narrow wires. So Chochma is Yenik Memazala Mepchinas Primis HaKeser. But there's another thing Chochma does. That's relation to Atik.
That's Chochma Stima. This is Chochma Stima.
No, it's Primis HaKeser. That's what he uses the expression. It could be Chochma Stima of Atik, but he doesn't say that here. Okay. And then there's another relationship between Chochma and Arich. So Arich, remember, every sphera has a structure to it. It has Chochma, Bina, Das through Malchus. Also Arich. So what does it say about Chochma and Arich? Not Atik, not Primis Keser. Arich, Chitzenius Keser. So it says Chochma Malbish Arich, and Chochma like the garments to the arms of Arich. So essentially think of it this way. Keser is the superconscious state that's not structured in the faculties. Chachma is first conscious faculty. Consciousness. So in its relationship with Atik, Pnimius Atik, Pnimius Keser, is like strands of hair, like thin wires that are drawing down from Pnimius HaKeser. Its relationship with Arich is Arich has a structure and its arms, Chachma is like garments, the arms of Arich. That's the language in Kabbalah. So that Alter Rebbe in the Drush Gimel Minei Adam and in other places, Chassidus talks about these two relationships. So on one hand, you'd think the lower level is a deeper one, but it's not. Because the garments, even though they're garments to the arms, but it's much deeper, the level of how Chachma relates to Pnimius Keser through the strands of hair. So on one hand, the strands are much narrower flow of energy. Arich to Chachma is not narrow. It's like wearing a jacket on your arms. So it's not narrow, but it's coming from a lower place. So he says, he's comparing this. Obviously, it's complex comparison, but it is a comparison to the difference between the dveikus of Gili Mina Etzem and the dveikus of Gili HaEtzem. So Chachma from Atik is Gili HaEtzem. However, it comes through a tzimtzum, the Cyrus, but it's Gili HaEtzem, because Pnimius HaKeser. The Chachma from Arich is Gili Mina Etzem, and it's more internalized, but it's a lower level of the divine, so it's not Gili Mina Etzem, it's coming through the garments of Chachma that is dressing up, is like the arms of Arich. Okay, this is obviously quite cryptic. If you want me to explain it in the basis of Chabad, I can do that. Why he's bringing that here, I think it's due to thoroughness primarily, that Rebbe Rashab is just connecting, because he said, like it says elsewhere, and it's also explained above. So he's just connecting it all. Briefly, just to put it into some basis of Chabad, I will do that. It works like this. We learned in volume 1 that in Chochmas Tema there are two levels. There's how it's in Atik and how it's in Arich. You know, the Chochmas Tema that's Sasum Be'etzem, completely beyond us. And Chochmas Tema that relates to us, but it's concealed. So you could have something that's concealed, but it could be revealed. You have a state that always remains fundamentally concealed. This was a long discussion in Ayin Beis in volume 1, where he spoke about the Mamutza of Keser. And he spoke about there at length about the Mem and the Samach, about the Makif of Chezer, Makif of Yosher. Basically, the Mamorim around Ha'isa Sukkasa Ayin Daled, back in volume 1. Now, all that's about an interface. The interface. Keser is an interface, as we learned, between divine and existence. In Keser itself, Atik relates more to the divine. Arich relates more to existence, like we learned in the top of last page. Maybe that's also why he's bringing it. Probably. Yeah. So one is Tachteina Sheba'atzmus, one is Reisha Mokel and Solim. Ayin of Yesha would be Atik, Pnimius HaKeser. Ayin of Yesha Nivra would be Arich. But now, what comes next? Chachma is the first place where it comes revealed in some form of Gili. Still a Gili la'atzmei. You're only revealing it to yourself. Whereas Keser is revelation altogether. So Chachma, the question is, what's Chachma drawing? Is it connected to Arich or Atik? So Chassidus explains it has an element from Atik. That's what gives it a taste of Elikus Mamish, Gilia Etzem, and it has an element from Arich which makes it more relates to existence. So basically, Chachma, that's Yenik, Derech Chassidus from Pnimius HaKeser, is how it relates to something that's completely beyond, to the divine Gilia Etzem that's beyond us, the Ayin of the Yesha Miti. And the way Chachma relates to Arich is how it relates to the Ayin of the Yesha Netzal, as we learned earlier. So that would be the essential Nakuda here. Yeah.
So the Niko Derech Cyrus is Gilui Min Ho'etzem, right?
No, Gili HaEtzem. The Malbishim Lezrei is the Arich is Gili Min HaEtzem.
So how can we have the Gila Etzem, even that Panemius Atik, if you said that it's totally concealed from us, that level? Chachmas Tima, that's totally concealed, not relatable. How could we even have that, even through the Syros?
As I told you, you experience it, you don't reveal it. You experience it.
Experience it, but don't hear it.
I may be wrong, by the way. I explained it this way because I thought Yanika Derech Chassidus. I think I got it wrong. I mean, it doesn't change pshat what I just said. It doesn't change pshat what I just said, but what I would say, that what I would change is the following. Like a side, and it's yenik straight from Lifnei Tzimtzum. So even though it's a Gili Mina Etzem, yeah, that's the wrong part is what you just said is correct. I got that wrong. The Yanika from Chochma from Pnimis HaKeser is like Kav from Lifnei Tzimtzum, and that's a Gili Mina Etzem, but it's still a Dveikus, a Gili Ein Sof Mamish. The lower level is not Gili, is even lower than that. He doesn't use, I tried to compare these two to Gili Etzem and Gili Mina Etzem. That's incorrect. Or maybe that's incorrect. I'm thinking now, that goes on the Kav. That's what he's saying. That the Kav, even though it's a Dveikus, not Dveikus Mamish, but it's Chinas Gavoya, Gili Eren Sef Mamish, like the Chachma that's Yenik from the Chassidus, because Kav and Chassidus are usually compared to each other. And that's higher than when it's Malbish Zroyas the Arich, which is not even Gili Minetz, and it's even lower than that. So first I thought that these two are similar to those two. I'm correcting myself now. I think that he's saying Yanika Derech Chassidus is like the Kav, and that's higher. That means it's a high level. Even though it's not Dveikus Mamish, because it's like a Saida, like a hair, comes to a Tzimtzum, but it's still a high level. I think that's what he wanted to say.
Even though it's al derech is chachus, but still it's a high level.
Yeah, that's what Pasha what he wants to say. I was trying to make it mamish that these two are those two, which you could say, but I don't think that's the pshat here. Yeah, that's what Pasha's pshat. I have to read it again to see the whole parentheses.
Gilo min ha'etzem is lehoyer sa'olames. Gilo ha'etzem is legalis atzmosai.
Correct. Anyway, we finished for the parentheses, and now we go back to the theme. The parentheses simply elaborated upon the Kav's Dveikus, that it's ha'ara of a ha'ara. Now he says, remember, this is all chitzenius hakav. V'kol zeh hu b'chinas chitzenius hakav. All this is the outer dimension of the kav. That what? That it relates to the ayin of the yesh hanivra. It relates to existence. Avol pnimius hakav, the inner dimension of the kav. Hu shenim shech mebchinas pnimius v'atzmius ein sof. That comes from the inner and core of Ein Sof. So now he's introducing in the Kav, there's the outer dimension, which is actually, think of it like the artist when he's using his paintbrush, his stylus. So he's painting a very intricate, beautiful image, the 10 spheres, let's say. So there's the actualization of it, the functionality of the paintbrush needs to have all the right inflections and the right strokes and the right details to shape Chachma Bina Das. But within the kavana, so to speak, of the kav, within the inner dimension of the paintbrush as it connects to his fingers, as it connects to his vision of the art, the Chesenius HaKav is not the only thing control, that's only implementation. There's a pnimius within it. The pnimius kavana, like what is directing these the Chachma Bina, the images. There's a directing force that lies within it, and that connects directly to the vision of the artist, all the way back to his highest levels of when he first envisioned the art. And that's where the Pnimius HaKav connects far more to Ein Sof directly, which would be obviously Ayin of Yesha Miti, which is a very interesting way of looking at it. The Ayin of the Yesha Nivra, its inyan is to create. So it has to be focused on what is Chochmah, what is Bina, the shape and form of existence, the spheres. The Pnimius HaKav is meant to really maintain the integrity of Gilei HaAtzmos. Like he says, Rak Legalis Atzmusei. And therefore, it has an element of not so much what are the details, but how are they reflecting what the Eibishter wants. So this is now going to be the Pnimius, like we learned earlier, as I mentioned, at the bottom of page 1149, 1150, he said that. He said that the 1150 especially, that 1149, 1150, that the Pnimius HaKav is not about its function, it's about the kavanah with a Pnimius, the etzem ha'oyer of Mamala Kalam. To put it in different words, I'm saying this as an introduction to what we're going to read now. So let's talk about this for a moment. You talk about that God has made two tracks, Soivev and Mamala. We call it etzem ha'oyer and Ispashtus ha'oyer. Etzem ha'oyer is, like he says here, Gilei etzem and Gilei mina etzem. The Gilei etzem, its inyan is to reflect and what Atzmus wants. Gilei mina etzem, which would be Soivev Kalam and carries more of that. It's transcendent energy. Gilei mina etzem is where the divine relates to existence, whatever level it may be. Now, how do these two speak to each other? That's the question. Do they speak to each other? Is it just two different entities, like the chief of staff, and he passes on the instructions to the rest of the departments, and each one goes and does their function? Or is there some deeper connection there? So what he's going to say here is that there's a deeper connection. So in general, Soivev Kalalman and Mamala Kalalman, or Etzem Ha'er and Ispashtus Ha'er, or Gilei Mina Etzem, are two separate tracks. But when you really think about it, even the Gilei Mina Etzem, even Mamala Kalalman that is instructed to go and relate to and create and shape existence, also has a Pnimius. Why is that? Why does I mentioned the Shliach? Why do we have that thing to relate to that existence? Because Atzmus wants a dir b'tachtenim. To do so, you need to have specifics. Remember, we spoke about the Shliach. If the Shliach is sitting in Yechidus by the Rebbe all day, he's not going to do the job. We need him to go to a city and go put on tefillin on Jews and have women light candles and make Shabbos and teach Chassidus and illuminate a part of this world and make it into a dira b'tachtenim. Good. If he's thinking and spending all the time by the Rebbe in Yechidus, he's not going to do it. So you need him to go out there. But when he goes out there, you want to make sure he never forgets where he's coming from. You want to make sure he's aligned to the kavanah. So you can have two levels of alignment. One level is, okay, I know I'm here because of the Rebbe, but right now I'm focusing on my job. But within the focus on the job, even when you're busy with the details, like I mentioned with Aaron HaKohen, Lo Shina, even when you're sitting and doing your accounting, you're sitting at the end of the year and you're sitting with your accountant and bookkeeper and figuring out how your budget and so on. So you would think, Begoli, you're completely not doing you're not right now in the Etzem Ha'er, you're in the function part. But the truth is, that itself is also driven by the Etzem Ha'er of you sitting by the Rebbe. However, it's taking the form of this shape and form. So you need two things. You need to be focused on what you're doing, but you need to always be aware that it's a piece of the Ein Sof that put you here in the first place. I'll just give an example with a story with, who's it? B'yamin Kletzker, I think. So they say he was a businessman. He was making his cheshbenus. He's calculating, Tishrei or January, P&L, income, expenses, Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevis. Then he comes to the end, December 2020. Well, it wasn't 2020 then, but you get the idea. And he writes, okay, so he has now all the calculations. Now you have to add it up. What's the net profit or net loss? And instead of writing a net number, a total, a sachakel, he writes ein eid milvade. They're nothing but God. So the Rebbe asks the question, if he's so consumed with Eined Milvadei, how did he have the composure and the presence of mind to write numbers on each line? He should have written Tishrei equals Eined Milvadei, Cheshvan equals Eined Milvadei, Kislev Eined Milvadei. So the Rebbe said, because if he did that, he wouldn't be a businessman. He belongs in the yeshiva. He should be learning Chassidus. You have to do Masa Matan Ba'amuna. You have to do your business al pi halacha. You have to be accurate. You have to be honest. You have to be transparent. That's what Torah wants. But when you want to know what's the sachakel, what's the sum total, and what's the driving force behind it, it's not the money, it's not the number, it's godliness. Eined Milvadei. So this is explained like Yosef was different than his brothers. The brothers and the Ovis were all Reyet Sein. They were shepherds. One of the reasons why they were shepherds was because their shepherds. Sheep were docile. You could in the meadows when they graze, they could sit and be mizbeinen, the Ovis and the Shvatim. They could contemplate on God. They could pray. You know, they're not in the hoo-ha of Wall Street and the marketplace. So it's very conducive to spiritual growth. Yosef was also a Reyet Sein until he was 17. Then he was thrust and thrown into Mitzrayim. He becomes Mar de Chushbana. He becomes the first Jewish accountant by Potiphar. And then, of course, he becomes the viceroy, second in command, where he's managing what? An entire empire. He was like the commodity of the time was grain. He turned Egypt, which means he had to be immersed in the business of it. He was directly involved, as we see. So Chassidus says, which is a greater madrega? The Reyet Sein, the shepherds, or the accountant, or the businessman? So Chassidus says it's the businessman, because that they are connected, not Silas Talakus. They don't have that distractions. Here he is in Mitzrayim, in Erves Ha'aretz, a completely depraved and anti-God country, and been involved in business. And yet he remembered the things he learned 22 years earlier with his father, the Egla Rufa, and the other things. He maintained his entire, much bigger Chiddush. Chassidus actually explains with this the Seder Hayim. It's a Sefer, Seder Hayim, that says, why does the Gemara say, Lo'elam yehei adam zoyer b'tfilas ha-mincha? A person should always be careful in davening mincha. Ki, Eliyahu's prayers were answered by mincha. L'cheira Shacharis is a much bigger prayer, much more primary prayer. Hashmanet, it's a longer prayer. Ma'ariv Hashma, Punkt Mincha, the shortest prayer. So Chassidus says, because Shacharis and Ma'ariv are davened before the workday and the end of the workday. So it's not that difficult to put yourself in a place of davening. Middle of the day, middle of the workday. That's how it was in those days. Ma'ariv was always davened after the workday. So middle of the day, where you're busy in your work and you tear yourself away to go daven, that's the Chiddush of Yosef. That's the Chiddush that you're immersed in this world, in the details, but you never forget and you connect. That's the hardest part. So getting back to this, what he's saying here is that the Chetzenius Akav is the functionality. It's the business of the world. Like I mentioned, Mila de Hedyeta. God is creating existence. It's a high level of Dveikus, but it's still with a tzimtzum. The Pnimis Akav always remembers, even when you're in those details, the Pnimis behind it all is really Eined Milvadei. It's about God. But God wants these details. Just explaining a bit how it works. So you have the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti is embedded in the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. It's the Pnimis of the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. That's essentially what he's saying here, a deeper way. But let's read the parentheses. He says, V'yesh Leimer, saying that, so again, Avol Primis Akav Hu Shenimshach Mebchinas Primis Ve'atzmus Seid Ein Sof. Ein Sof, I'm sorry, Ein Sof. That the Primis draws from the inner and core of Ein Sof. Still the Kav, but it's the Primis of the Kav. The Rebbe Rashab explains, V'yesh Leimer, we can say, Shezo B'chinas Gili Ha'etzem Liyaz B'chinas Er Primi. You see, Gili Ha'etzem, not Gili Mina Etzem. That this is the Gili Ha'etzem that he wants Er Pnimi. In other words, even though Er Pnimi fundamentally is Gili Mina Etzem, but there's a Gili Etzem within the Gili Mina Etzem, which means, what's the Kavanah? Why does the Eibishter want Er Hamamala? Why does he want a Kav that creates structure? It's not independent. The same God that created the Er, that emanated that's Gilead Etzem, that reveals him in his full glory, also exists within the Pnimi. It's the Gilead Etzem in the Pnimi. It's Meiredik. In other words, it's the Kavana Pnimius in the Gilead Etzem within the Gilead Mina Etzem. The Sheiresh Hamshacha Zu, the root of this transmission of this Pnimi, Hilamayla Mesheiresh Hamshacha the Gilead Etzem the B'chinas Makiv. He's going now further. It's even deeper. The root of this Hamshacha that the Eibishter wants an Pnimi that will enter and permeate existence on its terms. In other words, he wants an Ayin of a Yesh HaNivra, which we know is lower than the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, ostensibly. So he's saying the root of this Hamshacha is higher than the root of the Hamshacha of Gilead Etzem and the Makiv that never enters into existence, because it always remains transcendent, removed and above it. Because the Gilead of Makiv is only a reflection, we learned. The Pnimi has something atzmi in it, as he's going to say. He said, so even though the Makif is taka Gilead Atzmus, it's revealing the Etzem, and the Etzem as is removed from existence, like he said before, not lehoyeras ha'elamus, but Gilead Atzmusei, hari ein bezem b'chinas ha'atzmus, rak b'chinas hispashtus ha'orlevad. The truth is, it doesn't have within it a state of Atzmus. It's just revealing Atzmus. It's only an extension and a reflection alone. The Gilead Etzem der Pnimi hu b'madregas ha'atzmus. And the Gilead Etzem in Er Pnimi is coming from the level of Atzmus, because Atzmus wants a tachtenim, dira b'tachtenim. Remember, the whole reason is an Er Pnimi is for fulfilling the kavonas ha'atzmus. The reason for Gilead Er Seviv is to reflect Atzmus, not the kavonas ha'atzmus. It's like what we spoke, that the Yesh HaNivra touches the Yesh HaMiti. Er doesn't touch the Yesh HaMiti. So let me explain this a little more. In other words, what he's saying here is that, I'll put it in a simple mashal. For a teacher to express himself without simtsumim, we spoke unfiltered, just to speak without any limits, is easier than for the teacher to focus himself and tailor his ideas toward a student. That requires a lot deeper energy. Why? Because left on his own, no problem, I'll just reveal myself. But the Pnimi means that the Atzmus went and made an effort to reveal a Gilui that's not Gilui Etzem, Gilui Mina Etzem. That kavana that the Eibishter has to make a Gilui Mina Etzem in order that the godly energy should enter into existence has a deeper element of Atzmius than the Gilui Etzem, which comes from just revealing a Lakus on its own. So in a sense, basically the kavana of creating Dirib Atachtenim, which is rooted in Atzmus, also transfers over to the Gilui Lakus that's necessary to create those Nivrayim. Whereas the higher levels of Gilui in Giluyim, they're higher. In Dveikus, they're higher. But they don't have that Atzmius in it. That's what he's saying here. That the Primis HaKav, in a sense, goes all the way to the Etzem, whereas even Er Makiv doesn't have that quite the same way. It's pretty radical stuff here, but it's very geschmack.
What is the function of Or Masovev, transcendent light, in the connection with the revelation of Or in the Dira Shabbatachtonim? Because Mamash, you're saying it's drawing, what you just said is its internal light, it's intrinsic Or, but so what would be the function of transcendence?
It creates the true bittul. It's a true Gilead bittul. It's the idea that you only have godliness. Let's never forget that the revelation of godliness comes from the higher level. This is more God's intention.
Practical.
There's a deeper element of God's intention. It's like saying the lowest of worlds is where God wants a dira b'tachtenim. But let's not take away from Atzilus and all the higher levels. They reveal more godliness.
Thank you. Shkar.
Jacobson, maybe that a mushal for this would be an interpretation. Sometimes a person can be give an excellent technical interpretation of a speech or something, or a book or a thought, but he doesn't have the grasp, the deep kavana of the original speech. Sometimes he has to have more leeway to put it in a way that is not just technically correct, but conveys the panemius of what the original speaker or the original author wants to convey. So it's not a, you would have both there. You would have both the intrinsic kavane within the technical.
So what is it? So what are you saying? The difference between one and what?
No, I would just say that this idea of the having Gila Etzem within Gila Mina Etzem would be sort of like the a good technically correct interpreter that translates the words technically correct, but doesn't convey the deeper kavana, of the original author. I mean, sometimes you can't just use a literal interpretation. You have to, in order to convey the deeper meaning of it, you can be a little more, you have to paint it.
Yeah, that works. That could work, yeah. That's a good mashal. Yeah, that's a good mashal. Back on page 1150, he spoke about it as well. That's where I took some of what I just said. Yeah. Okay. So continuing on, he says, following the parentheses, the bebchinas pnimius hakav, in the inner dimension of the kav, lo yesh ischalkus. There are no distinctions. Remember, we said chitzenius hakav was made up of dots, of points, the spheres in a subtle way. Whereas pnimius hakav does not have the ischalkus, distinction, or ischalkus means diversity. Everywhere it's equal. It does not go through gradations. There's a certain equal intensity in the whole Pnimius HaKav that's not subject to the hierarchy and the changes within the Chitzenius HaKav, which, like we said before, like you just said with the interpreter, but let's go back to the paintbrush, where the details is how you're creating details, but the Pnimius HaKavona in the details are one. There's one vision that these details are conveying. So there's no ischalkus, kaneda, as it's known. Ve'ein bo hislapshus v'isalmus. And in this Pnimius HaKav, there's no slapshus, no enclothing itself. It's not engaging and manifesting, and it's not being concealed. It remains within the Chitzenius HaKav, so-called in the background, remains this Pnimius HaKav that maintains the integrity, that the Gili HaEtzem, the Gili HaEtzem within the Pnimi of the Kav. The Gam Kamoisha Mislabish, he says, because also the way it does manifest, Hushay Slapshus Hu Belakus, Ukamoisha Kosum Makam Macher. Oh boy, okay. So now he's saying that even also when it does manifest in some way, the Pnimius HaKav, it's a slapshus in elikus. It's not a slapshus in the structure of existence. The Chitzenius HaKav, like in the painting, you're painting a detail. You're painting a person, a water, a bird, a tree. The Pnimius HaKav is a slapshus to some extent, he says, but it's a slapshus in elikus. It focuses on the divine element in it. That's what it sounds like he's saying here. In other words, it's not Sevav Kalalman. It's not Eirein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. So there is some islapshus. There is a kav. But it's Pnimius HaKav. It's like elikus mislabish and elikus, so to speak. The Gilia Etzem, there's the kavana atzmis in this eir, is manifesting in a kav. So essentially, it's like a type of, within elikus itself, it's a islapshus, as opposed to islapshus in something that is defined, that is a defined entity that's not just a purely the divine element in it.
It could be like for an artist, maybe conveying you could see a painting sometimes that's technically beautiful, correct, but doesn't have a soul. A great artist is able to express the soul. You can see something deeper,
Something like that.
Or also,
art.
And that comes from the artist himself, it's the Atmas Shabbat, the Elokus bin the Elokus, rather than.
I think another good example, which I thought you would bring, is let's look at a pianist or a harpist or a violinist. You could be playing music beautifully and following the notes, but you don't feel, you're not in the zone yet. It's not like all one flow from within. It's technically right.
Right.
And then there's a point where the artist loses himself,
yes.
And he just becomes the pneumius akav flows through the chitzenius akav, like that.
Right. Or you see that in a technically proficient piano player, as you mentioned. That's a great example. But some reason it just doesn't grab you. Whereas somebody that puts his soul into the music, into the keyboard, you feel that, you see it, you sense it. It's a whole different piece of art.
Yeah. Yeah, those are good examples. Yeah, these are good. This is very good. The more examples you can bring from our reality and our life, the better it is, because these are obviously deeply abstract ideas, but they are very relevant because they're really dissecting the very nature of existence in a very beautiful, powerful way. So now I will challenge you and ask you, so then what is the role of Eir HaBligvul? If Primus HaKav already has that element, what does Eir HaBligvul do? So I'll be a rhetorical question. The answer is, it introduces you to a God that's beyond existence altogether, to a God where you stand in complete awe of. It's not the Atzmis HaKavana in this structure. It's Bechlal, God himself. It's like totally lost, where there's no details altogether. And you want to have that as well. So it's, in other words, the God that's not even an artist, not just the pneumius of the art and the chitzenius of the art, but he's not even an artist yet. So there's that element of experiencing God in his complete state, where he's even beyond spheres and beyond even these levels we're talking about. And yet there's something atzmi is digdafki in the structure, in the air primi, as he said. Let me just finish the parentheses and maybe we'll stop there. Let's see. Yeah, I think so. V'amitis madrega zu. And the truth of, the real truth of this level that we're discussing now, primis hakav, eine bo b'chinas islapshus klal. Okay, so he's saying what does come in islapshus, he says, is an elikus, but the mitis madrega doesn't even come in islapshus at all. It doesn't manifest in any way. It's like the inner secrets of Torah that are called the secrets of secrets. In other words, the secrets of Torah they're a secret compared to that which is revealed. But the secrets of secrets, the Pnimius say this Torah, is completely not bislapshus. Meaning, as I said, you could experience it, but it's not going to be in any manifest form. It's like you're completely absorbed in it in the highest possible level.
What's the difference between that and Or Ein Sof Bichlal?
Or Ein Sof is just a name. Or Ein Sof can mean many things.
I'm referring to the light you just said, that which is not differentiated at all, that which is sort of beyond our capacity to.
Which one? You're talking about Pnimis HaKav, or you're talking about Eir HaBligvul Sevav Kalam?
I meant Or HaBligvul. That's what I meant to say.
Eir HaBligvul is not subject to any structure, to any spheres altogether.
Right, and that's my question. If this is,
so what's the question?
If this or inside the
this
Kav,
is not what he's talking about here.
What or is he
he's
talking
not talking about that here. He's talking about Pnimis HaKav here. That's not what he's talking about. I mentioned here he's not talking about Eir HaBligvul. He was talking about the Kav has the Pnimis of the Kav, carries with it the kavana, the core intention. He's not talking about Eir Ein Sof HaBligvul here.
I understand. That's why I'm asking my question.
So what's your question? Then I don't understand your question.
The internal structure of the Kav is comprised of godliness that is beyond differentiation, beyond description. Okay.
He didn't say that here. Beyond the description of beyond the differentiation of the spheres. That's in the Chitzenius HaKav.
Well, then how? Okay. Let me think about it more. Sorry for interrupting.
Is the vision of the artist within the details, not the vision of the artist beyond the details. Okay. Okay, we'll stop here. We're going to stop here. Starts another section here. Okay, so we're summing up is we have a structure of existence. We have the divine energy that's within that structure. Within that divine energy, there's also a Pnimius that so-called drives it. That's like the vision within it that unites it all. And then you have that which is higher altogether than the Kav, which here we're not referring to at all, because that's what he spoke about earlier. Here we're talking about the Kav after the Tzimtzum that has these two dimensions. And he's going to explain that this is the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, this is the Ayin of the Yesh Hanivra. And I explained it with the different examples we gave. We'll elaborate more. We'll stop here.